Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, and welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. This is episode number 75 here. And this week we are talking about the Berlin Wall. We're going to get into it, folks. We're going to find out all the deets on how that wall came to be. But before we get there, got a little housekeeping to do. What am I watching? I just watched that movie Annihilation. And that thing, it was different. I'll be honest, I couldn't get to the end. I was watching it. It's one of those things where it's like I lost my attention span and it got really, really weird. But when you start from where you start from in that movie, it can only get weirder. Like basically in the movie, there's like, it starts with this guy's in the military, and he's gone into this thing, what do they call it? The shimmer, something like that. And it's like there's this thing has shown up on Earth that is like taking over parts of the property, like the ground. And when you go in there, it like distorts time and space, and like it makes things grow in a weird way. It's very weird. But it gets to this point where like, I don't know, man. It's really hard to describe. It's good. If you like weird stuff, this is for you. This is definitely for you. But yeah, I didn't finish it, so can't really give you too much. But I'm gonna say I definitely tried to watch it. What am I listening to? Not a whole lot right now. Listening to this audiobook right now that I got from the library. Let's see what it's called here. A little bit of self-help for you. Every now and then they can be good. What's it called? 101 essays that will change the way you think. Now, have I changed the way I think? Probably not. And to be honest, it's been about a week since I listened to it, so I don't even remember how it changed my way of thinking. But I am listening to it. That's what the part of the program is. So now you know. Also, I mean, I think I mentioned this one before, but I listen to it all the time. I listen to Up First by NPR all the time. It has become something I definitely kind of try to get into in the morning before I go to work. It's worth it if you like NPR. They kind of give you like a 5-10 minute, kind of breakdown of what happened yesterday, what's going on today. But let's see. Before we get to the actual pod, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say. The numbers have been really good these past couple weeks. I don't know what happened. I don't know who found what, but they've been going up a little bit. I appreciate that. Just kind of trying to find the new direction for where the pod's going to go in these next couple months. Doing an idea of like, I wouldn't call them themed episodes, but I do think I have an idea of what I want to cover for the next few months. I think it kind of starts with this episode and goes forward with we're talking about the Berlin Wall, which we'll find starts really with the end of World War II. I'm going to kind of go from like the 1940s to right up around the 70s, which I mean, we covered Watergate a couple episodes ago. There's that time frame is just so rich with just events, history. There are so many things that occurred in that 25 to 30 year period that make the world what they are now. And I don't think that it gets talked about enough. I don't think that light gets shined on that area of history and life enough. That's what I realized when I look into this stuff, or just how coincidental or how things progress. Even with we'll talk about, how we have talked about the fact that J. Edgar Hoover died a month before Watergate happened. And it's like, I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think it just happened. It's not happenstance. It's not a chance that happened that way. So I'm really, hoping that we can uncover some different things by kind of having, I think, because if we can spend the next 6 weeks truthfully doing research on a concerted, kind of a concise amount of space and time, there's got to be some stuff we can uncover. That's the hope. That's the goal. Let's see. As I always say, if I can promote those different shows and podcasts, I can always tell you about my own mini episode that comes with this podcast. It's Bite Size Bios, BSB. We are in, I think the last one was episode 32, which was another kind of market change from what we've been doing. I covered a man named Mansa Musa. I did not know he even existed. I did not know he was even real. I thought it was, kind of something possibly made up or on the same kind of vein as like Wakanda, Black Panther, stuff like that. But no, the man he actually existed about 700 years ago. And as far as we know, was the richest man to ever exist on the face of the earth. So go back and check that out. We have a lot more interesting bite-sized bios coming down the pike. They come out every other Monday at 4:30 a.m., the same place as How Did That Happen does. But yeah, there's not much to get into before we get to the actual episode. Let's see, like I always say, like and subscribe wherever you find this. 5 stars if you loved it. 2 stars if you didn't love us. Tell us why you didn't love it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. We really do appreciate it. Helps the pod grow. Like I said, I've been noticing the listens have been going up a little bit. I like that. We've been in a couple different couple other countries have been listening to us. That's great. But yeah, without further ado, as we normally do, here is the episode. All right, so for this week's episode, or this week's segment of Breaking Old News, what I have for you here is a news clipping from the Washington Evening Star from July 7th, 1955, and it has to do with basically the German court, the country of Germany, still not ruling on Hitler's death, still not being able to truly say this man is dead. And so I'll read you a little bit from this clipping. It says, Munich, Germany, July 7th. German courts delay ruling on Hitler's death. Hitler committed suicide more than 10 years ago in his Berlin bunker, but the Germans have not yet ruled him legally dead. 3 years ago, the Austrian government asked the Germans for an official death certificate, so Hitler's estate could therefore be confiscated. The request went to a Bavarian magistrate's court in Berchtesgaden, near the Austrian border, where Hitler maintained a retreat. The court last October said that it had no doubt Hitler is dead, but it has not yet handed down an official opinion. It is still investigating. What does that even mean? You know he's dead, but you won't say it. And I find that interesting because we'll get to it. We'll get to it in the actual episode. But I never thought about, because all this I'm getting all this after the fact. And when I was born, Hitler had been dead for 50 years. But there was a time right after his death where no one was really sure if he was really dead or not. He was like the Tupac or Elvis of his time. You know what I mean? It's like, is he dead? We don't know if he's dead. He might be dead. He might be in Bermuda. Who knows? But that was interesting to me to find out. And to find out that it had kind of kept a secret by the powers that be, the ones who know. We'll get to that in the segment. Trust me, it is worth listening to. But I just put that in here because it'll make a difference. It'll make a difference. What I will say, I'm flipping around on the same newspaper. What do we got here? Just because this is a 70-year-old newspaper, they have liquid roach killer, kills roaches and ants. Oh, they're having a blanket sale. Sears is having a blanket sale, layaway. Ooh, open Saturdays. 100% all wool for $7.57. Wow, guys, run down there and get you some. So today we're going to talk about the Berlin Wall, but what is normal in this podcast is before we can actually get to what we're going to talk about, we have to go back and talk about what it was before we get to talk about it. So we're going to go back to basically the end of World War II is the impetus for what the Berlin Wall will become. I say that not for it to be a hot take or breaking news. It was news to me. I didn't know much about the Berlin Wall going into this before I came in. It was knocked down before I was even born, and I don't think it gets explained as well as it should why it was even there. To people who didn't live it. I think if you lived it, you understand. You lived it, you were there, you get it, communism, yada, 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 all that good stuff. But if you're just coming into this world, with no pre-existing understanding, you're just like, why did they put a wall through this city and divide it? Dividing the entire country. So let's take it back. Let's go back to 1945, which was an interesting year for the world. Fun fact about that, before we get too deep into it, found out that Hitler and FDR died in the same month, in the same year. These guys had fought each other for years. They end up passing away almost within 2 weeks of each other. I think FDR dies in like April 12th or something like that. And of course, Hitler commits suicide April the 30th in 1945. So 1945 is kind of where we see That is the end of World War II in the European theater. Of course, the Japanese and Asian theater is still going on the other side of the world. But when Hitler commits suicide, that basically spells the end as we know it for the Third Reich. And the masses kind of sweep on Berlin. Now, Berlin is taken over initially by the Soviets. The Soviets are who kind of come in and kind of take it over before the other Allied powers get there. That's kind of what Hitler's suicide is racing against. That's the clock that he's up against, knowing that, you know, the Soviets are just barreling down the road, coming into Berlin, so he kills himself. So they get here, and I think that's important to note because in some of the documentaries that I've watched, they mention in the idea of war, whatever it's been for as long as war has been, you take your enemy's capital, and that's kind of like you winning. You know what I mean? In most games of any sort, anything like that, you have to get. It's almost like capture the flag. It's like the most deadliest 50 million people death toll worth of capture the flag. So you have to get to Berlin. You capture Berlin. World War II, European theater is over. That was their idea. That was their driving force. And I think they wanted Berlin because it. How can I put this? It was kind of. You have to understand the way the communists think, but it was like they were trying to keep it out of the hands of the West. They wanted to continue to kind of keep their Iron Curtain up, and they couldn't do that if they were just going to give that, you know, away. And they spent a lot of time actually trying to get the U.S., the U.K., and France out of Berlin. But I just think it's interesting to note that they were the first ones there. So I mean, in a way, you can almost understand why they lay claim to it. Okay, and so before we get to the actual Potsdam Conference, I do want to run through just a quick run through of Hitler's death, which was a suicide, because I think it's. I was watching documentaries about it last night, and I don't know the way everything culminates. It's like you wouldn't. I would say I didn't see it coming, right? But the documentaries that I watched, they had Hitler had been profiled by the CIA or the precursors to the CIA, the OSS. They had profiled him and basically said they knew he was going to commit suicide. They knew that when the war was looking like it was never going to turn around for him, that was the way that his mind worked. That he was going to. So it wasn't a surprise to them. Let's see. So on April the 30th, 1945, as the Battle of Nuremberg and the Battle of Hamburg ended with American and British occupation, in addition to the Battle of Berlin raging above him with the Soviets surrounding the city, along with his escape route cut off by the Americans, he realized that all was lost, and not wanting to die the same way his buddy Mussolini did, he decided to take his own life, along with his wife, who he actually got married to right before they died. Right? That's why I think it's worth mentioning. Is just like I watched a documentary about these, like the entire layout of his suicide. This man basically called Eva Braun from like the Bavarian mansion in the mountains and was like, "Come down here, sweetheart. It's about to go down." She showed up. And everybody was like, "Oh crap, he brought his girl. It's getting serious." Like they said, everybody knew that he was going to commit suicide. Like, it wasn't. That must have been made the air so weird. It must have been so odd to because they had lunch before he committed suicide. Like he got married, and then he went to a meeting. I think they sat down and had lunch. How can you have lunch? What is the point of having lunch if you're going to commit suicide? I mean, I don't know, but so yeah. I mean, they said they had the lunch. They shook hands. Well, he and Eva Braun shook hands with the people, with like his workers or whatever, and they went to his bedroom, and in a couple of minutes they heard a gunshot, and they ran in there, and they found Eva Braun was sitting straight up, because they both took cyanide pills, but they said they found Eva Braun sitting up, dead, and they found the Fuhrer, Adolf Hitler, slumped over from a gunshot wound after he'd taken the cyanide pills, and so that's his suicide. After that, he was taken out and burned. And they have videos of not of his burning, but where they found the ditch where they burned him at. They burned him, and then what did they do with? I forget what they did with his remains. But the interesting part about this, and this is why this is one of the reasons why this is actually seen as the beginning of the Cold War, and that's something I didn't know. I didn't know how fast the Cold War started after the World War II ended. It basically started up while World War II was still going on. The Cold War already was happening while World War II was still basically a thing, because the Soviets, of course, like we said, get to Berlin first. They find the body of Hitler, right? And Stalin, being the sneaky little trickster that he is, chooses to just lie about that. He keeps it to himself. Tells the Allied forces that they don't know where Hitler is. He and that girl probably ran off. You know, maybe they're in Switzerland. Maybe they're in who knows, right? But they're not here. But he knows they're dead. And so that just starts literally the lies and the deceit that would become known with the Cold War. Now, cut to just 20 years later. We're going to jump back. But 20 years later, they actually end up saying, we knew he was dead all along. And it's like, we just chose to keep it a secret. Okay, why? What? Well, how do you get points for that? But so jump back, 1945, Hitler's dead, Soviets are here. In his will, Hitler dismissed his second in command. He actually ended up naming the next guy, this guy Joseph Goebbels, Goebbels, he named him as the successor to the Third Reich, right? Check it out. Next day, that dude commits suicide. Not only does he commit suicide, he kills all 6 of his kids and his wife. What? Like, literally, all 6 of his kids get fed like some sort of like sleeping pill in a chocolate bar or something like that. And then when they're sleeping, I think his wife shoots him up with morphine, so they all overdose on morphine, basically like heroin or whatever, opioids. And then what's said is like, I guess they watch like their kids die. I think he sits there, or the wife sits there and plays a game of solitaire, drinks a glass of champagne. They go outside into the garden, which is right above. They're all in the bunker under Hitler's like mansion, like city, like municipal house or whatever. They go in the gardens of that place and they commit suicide. I mean, when I was watching this and just realized that all the big players of the Nazi regime basically just ended their lives. Like, and it wasn't even just them. What is it? The Heinz Himmler guy, right? Who was basically like the architect of the final solution, who was orchestrating his own surrender with the Allied powers. He gets arrested and commits suicide a couple days later. Because like they were saying they didn't know how much he was going to be held accountable for the Holocaust. He didn't think that people were going to be like, I don't know, ew, bruh, that's wrong, but they were. They totally were. All right, so I'm still setting the scene. If you're wondering, I'm not going too much off on a tangent. I think all of this stuff actually plays a part in the creation of the Berlin Wall. We're going to get there, I promise you. So, where are we at? Hitler's dead. All his friends are dead. His wife is dead. His dog is dead. FDR is dead. Truman is now the president. Never went to college. I don't know why I spilled names. Just got to say that. And he comes over to basically Germany, and they do what's called the Potsdam Conference. Now, the Potsdam Conference is where they decided how they're going to split up Germany, how they're going to split up Berlin. Now, there's three main people that are in attendance at this meeting, but even that changes because, that's what's crazy about the Potsdam Conference. And if you really think about it, and all the powers that be that were in control of this, Truman shows up because FDR just died 2 months prior. Matter of fact, this happens in July. It happens in July of 45. Truman's been president for 2 months. While they're there, Churchill also comes because he's leading England. He's leading the UK. And it's going to be Stalin. So it's Stalin, it's Truman, and it's Churchill, right? Truman, new president. While Churchill is there, he gets voted out of office. His party loses power. So halfway through, he's no longer relevant. Halfway through, they bring a new guy. Hold on, what's his name? I'm gonna forget it. Give me a second. Right, Anthony Eden. That's who took his place. So Anthony Eden shows up halfway through the Potsdam Conference talks because he's the new prime minister of Britain. And his title was the Earl of Avon. Pretty dope name. Like, it's pretty slick, pretty sly. So, it's interesting because I just say that because the powers that be that are controlling this, kind of setting up what's going to be, they're getting switched out almost faster than, I don't know, tires at a NASCAR race. You know what I mean? It's like, well, we got FDR. No, it's actually Truman because he's dead. Or we got Winston Churchill. No, it's actually Earl of Avon because his party lost power. The only actual mainstay is Stalin himself. He was the guy who was invaded. He was the guy who was there afterwards. He was the guy who stayed around for a few years. But that conference, like I said, which happened in July 45, was when they decided to break down Berlin. They basically did this. They broke down Germany into East and West Germany, right? East Germany, of course, closer to Russia, and West Germany, closer to all the other countries that were not trying to kill a bunch of Jews. And the western part is what's controlled by the Allies. Basically, the UK gets a part, the US gets a part, France gets a part, and then Russia gets their own part. And then they divide up the capital of Berlin does the exact same way, which I think you would say, okay, doesn't sound great, but it wasn't supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be temporary. I don't think this stuff was not supposed to happen. I don't think it was supposed to go on for the next 30 years or 40 years as it did. But they decide to separate it out. They break it down, and there's not really an issue to begin with. There's not really a problem. The travel is free, back and forth. You live in the West, you want to hang out in the East. You got your mom's in the West, but you live in the East. Come on over, man. Hang out with Ma Dukes. You know, what's up? Let's have some dinner, whatever. Go back home. Nobody's mad, right? This happens for probably about 10 years. Because basically, I think by 1949, even though I said 10 years, but by 1949, they had kind of gotten things like settled down as far as like the Soviets had their own government in Eastern Europe, or excuse me, in East Berlin, East Germany, and so did the West. So they made it a little more official than just, some talks at a conference. But it was around 1961 where things got a little hairy. But I mean, it's not surprising. None of this should have come as a surprise to the communist leaders. Basically, I think during the time, but by the time they had made, how can I put this? From the moment that they had separated East and West Germany to the moment where they decided to put a wall up, I think more than 2 million people had come through Eastern Germany to get to the western part. Because it's weird how they had set it up. It's like, I think if you're in the West, you were not allowed to go to the East as far as like to live. You could go in there to work, you could go in there, whatever. Diplomats were allowed to go in there whenever they wanted to. But if you were just a Western society, I could be wrong about this, but this is what I've gathered from the information that I've taken in, is that the West was not allowed to go to the East, but the East was allowed to bring in people from the Eastern Germany to East Berlin so they could work. And then they were actually escaping from the East Berlin on into the West, West Berlin, into West Germany. So they were just literally just losing people every day. And so that's the manpower, that's the economics, there's just people. They're like, they don't have enough people to kind of continue their society. So what do? What do? They decide to build a wall. They go all Trump on these guys. But before we get to that actual wall that went up in the early 60s, we got to go back because things weren't always so dreamy in the late 40s. The first real issue that was had between the East and West parts of Germany is called the Berlin Blockade. And that happened between June of 1948 and May of 1949. And what we find is that Berlin was used as a proxy war, if you will, for the Cold War. It was probably the first proxy war that happened within the Cold War, meaning that everything that happened in that city kind of stood for something larger for all of the entities that were involved. Now, what happened really here, the Soviets basically blocked off all possible entrances into the eastern part of Germany and also blocked off the western part from being able to get to anywhere. So they basically had the western part of Berlin just circled. And that was kind of the whole point of the Berlin Wall initially, was hopefully, I guess, if you circle them out enough, you can just push them out. You're not making it a comfortable spot for them to be. So during the multinational occupation of post-World War II Germany, the Soviet Union blocked the Western Allies' railway, road, and canal access to the sectors of Berlin under Western control. The Soviets offered to drop the blockade if the Western Allies withdrew the newly introduced Deutschmark from West Berlin. They did not do that. So the Western Allies basically organized what was then called the Berlin Airlift. And so, like I said, from June of 48 to right around, really, I guess, September of 49, the Allies carried supplies to people by plane. American and British air forces flew over Berlin more than 250,000 times, dropping necessities such as fuel, food, with the original plan being to lift 3,475 tons of supplies daily, almost 3,500 tons of supplies every day. So they did it for about a year. They basically called the bluff of the Soviets, because the Soviet idea was if we block you off, you'll just leave, and you'll leave it to us. Like I said, from the moment the Soviets came in Berlin in 1945, that's all they wanted. They wanted it. They thought it was theirs. And like I said, they were the first there. Who's to say they maybe don't lay a little claim to it? I don't know. So that was the first time. That was the first time, in my opinion, where they really butted heads. And you would kind of see it go back and forth throughout the next, really 20, 30 years. I realized I'd missed kind of mentioning that leading up to the actual building of the wall, so I wanted to go back. But now we're going to jump back to the early 60s. And so the Berlin Wall was officially referred to as the anti-fascist protective wall by the East German authorities, implying that the NATO countries in West Germany in particular were considered fascist by East German propaganda. I never knew that. I didn't know. Obviously that everyone's going to, You have different names for different things. We call it the Berlin Wall. They call it the anti-fascist protective wall. And watching all of this, it was really wild just to see, because we're all people. We're all just humans, right? It's all what's in your mind. These people seem literally incredulous to the fact that someone would want to live differently, or that the way they've chosen for people to live is not the good way. Like the way I think about it, if you have to make a wall and lock in your citizens, you're probably not doing a great job. You know what I mean? Like that's not, and it never crossed anybody's mind, or it must have, or I don't know. Like how could you keep up? Like I don't get it. I literally watched these documentaries the other night and was just shaking my head and disbelief. Like I don't get it. Like why would you, if you see people that are leaving your country, why would you continue to double down on what you're doing? Because literally, I mean, it'd be like anything. If I'm doing whatever, if let's say I have a house full of people and I'm in control of them, and for whatever reason, my rules always keep making them want to leave and jump out the window and try to swim off. And I'm like, I'll shoot you if you leave. That's not love. You know what I mean? That's not a positive environment, but that's the way they look at it. Like, they're like, why don't you want to stay here? And they're like, we don't like it here. Well, we're not going to let you go. And if you do, we're going to shoot you, because that's what they did when they made the Berlin Wall. I think more than 140 people were shot over the 40-year existence of the wall by trying to escape. So the Berlin Wall started off as a simple barrier made from barbed wire and concrete blocks, but over time it was reinforced and encircled the whole of West Berlin. Its final version was built in 1975 and ran for 150 kilometers. Now, it's really interesting the way they built the wall, because they literally built it like it ran along a line throughout the country, and sometimes that line just ran through houses and buildings. So you would have the wall would like run into a building, and then the building on the other side would be more wall. They would just commandeer these buildings and make them like guard shacks and guard houses and towers of the wall. And then what would actually happen sometimes is people would go into those buildings and jump out the other windows on the other side, because on the other side you're in West Berlin. So if you can go into that building, find the western facing side of that building and jump out, you're free. And people were doing that. I don't know if we're going to get into all the different escapes. There were quite a few. But that, I thought, when I saw that one, I was like, well, that's really, I don't know. I just don't think it was thought all the way through. And so before the wall's erection, before it came up, there were about 3.5 million East Germans who circumvented the Eastern Bloc immigration restrictions and defected from the eastern side to the western side. That's like, that was a thing that was really bothering people before they were like, yeah, it's cool, man. It's like, go visit my dudes, go have dinner, yada, 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 but come back and work in our, our factories and all that. They were going to visit mom, and they were staying over there where mom was. They weren't coming back. I think they said wild. So on the night, let's get into it. Let's get into the actual creation of the Berlin Wall. So on the night of August the 12th, 1961, East German soldiers laid down more than 30 miles of barbed wire through the heart of Berlin. East Berlin citizens were forbidden to pass into West Berlin, and the number of checkpoints in which Westerners could cross the border was drastically reduced. Like I said, it was kind of a one-way in, or kind of a one-way sort of traffic sort of thing. Westerners could come in, Easterners could not leave. The West was taken by surprise. They threatened a trade embargo against East Germany as a retaliatory measure. That didn't really work. And when it became evident that the West was not going to take any major action to protest the closing of these, the checkpoints and making the wall more, official, the East German authorities became more emboldened, and they just started closing off more checkpoints. So basically, it was down to like one. I think they call it Checkpoint Charlie. It was like the main way you can get in and through the Berlin Wall. So 3 days later, August 15th, they began replacing the barbed wire with concrete. This is all in 1961. The wall, the East Germans authorities declared, would protect their citizens from the pernicious influence of decadent capitalist culture. Which, like I said, and I guess this is the space for it. Let's get into it. Why are they so mad? I can't figure it out. Why? Because I was trying to figure it out, and we're gonna get to. I think I will do an episode on communism. It may be coming soon. I haven't mentioned this, but the next couple of months I think are gonna focus mainly on from the 40s to the 70s, and communism was a large part of that. And I just look at the communists, and I don't understand. I get if you want to have your own thing. I get if you don't like I get you being unique, being diverse. I get that, but it seems time and time again, when they create these communist societies, that they don't work out. That they don't, it's, like I've always said, I've studied communism, and you go to college, they teach you all this stuff. It looks good. It looks good on paper. Communism looks good on paper. It kind of does. But when you enact it, it never seems to come to fruition in a way that anybody had envisioned. Let me get off my soapbox because I just couldn't get it. So during the rest of 1961, the grim and unsightly Berlin Wall continued to grow in size and scope, and eventually consisted of a series of concrete walls up to 15 feet high. These walls were topped with barbed wire and guarded with watchtowers, machine gun emplacements, and mines. By the 1980s, the system of walls and electrified fences extended 28 miles through Berlin and 70 miles around West Berlin, separating it from the rest of East Germany. And kind of like what I was saying earlier, there would continue to just be a lot of posturing between the East and the West, between the Allied forces and the Soviets. I do find it odd when you think about it in a large kind of helicopter sort of timeline view. It's like they were at one point, they were all in this together. You know, at one point, they were all trying to kill Hitler. And when it was like that dude wasn't dead for 30 minutes, and all of a sudden, they're at each other's throats. You know, so like I said, they go back and forth. Checkpoint Charlie. I mean, even later on that year, there was a standoff for about 16 hours in which tanks came to Checkpoint Charlie from both sides. They were all like, yo, posturing, like, yo, what you gonna do? What you gonna do? I'm not gonna do anything, yada, yada, yada. This is all about because the Soviets were checking the credentials of Western diplomats and people who were coming into the East, and the Allied forces thought that was some sort of check on their free movement throughout the capital, so they were like, yo, let's go out there and show them what's what. Nothing happened. Nothing, I mean, stuff happened on the Berlin Wall, but as far as like the true powers going against each other, like most things, it was the innocent civilians who got caught in the crossfire. I think the first guy that ever got killed, let's mention his name. Let's give him his flowers. Let's see. Okay, well, you know what? On a documentary that I saw, they said it was Gunter Lipton who was the first person. But I'm looking up on Wikipedia right now, and they're saying it was a woman named Ida Siegman. She was the first person to die. She died from internal injuries after jumping out of the window of her apartment. Basically, kind of like what I was saying. I think, and I don't know. Let's see. They had those apartments that were on the wall. So depending on which side you came out of, you were on the right side. She died 9 days after they went up. Let's see if I can get a little more information here. So yeah, on the 21st of August, they barred all the entrances and windows to her apartment. The East German authorities did. The following morning, the day before her 59th birthday, she threw a quilt and some possessions down onto the street in West Berlin before she jumped out of the fourth floor. Four-story apartment. She jumped before the firefighters were able to properly open the jumping sheet, and she was severely injured when she fell on the pavement. So she jumped 4 feet or 4 stories to some asphalt. She died on her way to the Lazarus Hospital shortly after the fall, thus becoming the first known casualty of the Berlin Wall. Now, the next guy, he's not so lucky either. Gunter Lipton. This man, 24 years old, he was shot trying to swim across the river to get to West Germany. It's sad. There's like I said, at least 140 people died trying to escape. A lot of people did escape. They were going under the tunnel. They were tunneling under the wall. They were sneaking out in trunks of people's cars, stuff like that. I mean, it was crazy. So let's see. I don't know. There's not much. I don't know if there's much else I wanted to get to. There's always stuff. There's always so much stuff. There's always so many thoughts that I have about stuff like this. This kind of reminded me of the Watergate, where I just get my brain gets so saturated with stuff that I almost have a hard time bringing it to the forefront. Well, let's see. By 1989, the wall was lined with 302 watchtowers. More than 100 people had died trying to cross. And so that really is that's pretty much it as far as how it happened. Now, I think one of the more important things is that it eventually came down. I don't have much information about that. That's just because that's not what this pod is about. It's about how did it happen. So we're going to kind of try to stay in that main idea. All right, that was another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. Hope you guys enjoyed that. There is so much about the Berlin Wall. I mean, I may even actually do an episode on the fall of the Berlin Wall, because that stuff's kind of interesting too. But the focus of this particular episode was just about how did we get the Berlin Wall? How did we go from a country that was fully unified to being divided in both its capital and just the regular part of its countryside, and being split up in like 3 or 4 different ways for 40 years. And the murders that go with that, all that stuff. Too interesting not to mention. Very good. I hope you guys liked it. Like I said, there'll be more episodes. We're going to kind of stay in this vein of going from the 40s to the 70s. large events that may have happened during that time, kind of changed the world and different things like that. That's going to be the focus for the next couple weeks and months. As always, if you like what you heard here, give us 5 stars wherever you found this. 2 stars if you didn't like it. Tell us why you didn't like it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. I don't think there's much else to say before we get out of here. Always thank you guys for coming back week to week and press and play. I really do appreciate it. And we'll see you next week with the next episode of Bite Size Bios.